As you might already know, China is in a league of its own when it comes to renewables, and what we might call green tech more generally. In fact, in 2022 alone, China installed roughly as much solar capacity as the rest of the world combined, and produced the vast majority of the world's solar panels and wind turbines in 2024. Western automakers are struggling to compete with Chinese EV upstarts, and China's near monopoly on rare earth processing, which has become a hot topic in recent weeks, has helped it dominate in upstream industries like batteries. However, in the past couple of years, China has started investing hundreds of billions in green tech projects overseas, sparking talk of a second Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI 2.0. A reference to the world-spanning infrastructure build-out that China funded in the 2010s to better connect China to its trading partners in Eurasia and Africa. So in this video, we're going to look at how China is internationalizing its green tech supply chains, and how this compares to the BRI. Looking for a Christmas gift for the political fan in your life, or even just yourself? Consider a copy of our coffee table book, Assembly Required, which across 300 pages tells the story of some of the world's most beautiful parliament buildings, through stunning photography, custom designed floor plans and maps, as well as detailed stories written out by our team. Find out more and pick up a copy by clicking the link in the description. So let's get straight into it. In short, since the pandemic, China has been dramatically ramping up its overseas investments in green tech. According to a recent report by the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab, overseas investment quintupled between 2020 and 2021, before quadrupling again in 2022, and then roughly doubled again between 2022 and 2024. Around half of these projects target solar and batteries, but wind, new energy vehicles, and green hydrogen are also in the mix. To be clear, these projects aren't so much about generating renewable energy. Chinese companies aren't setting up solar farms or wind turbines, but rather are building factories to manufacture stuff like solar panels and electric vehicles, or the components that go into them. The scope of these investments is staggering. In 2024 alone, China invested over $70 billion in overseas green tech projects, with projects spread across 54 countries and every continent. Although a plurality of investment does seem to be going to Southeast Asia specifically. So what's driving this massive investment boom? Well, some of this is just Chinese companies responding to their economic self-interest. There's a lot of manufacturing already happening inside China, which has meant lots of companies competing over a limited pool of raw materials. Chinese companies can therefore gain a competitive advantage by setting up shop in another country with more plentiful, and thus cheaper, material inputs. A number of Chinese companies, for instance, have set up battery plants in Indonesia to take advantage of its abundant nickel reserves. But internationalizing China's green supply chains also endows certain strategic advantages upon the CCP. By investing early and dominating these supply chains, the CCP essentially gets to set the standard for green tech products, because other countries know that they have to align their regulations with China's if they want to trade seamlessly with the world's largest green tech producer. This both gives China global influence and allows the CCP to mould the rules to suit Chinese industry. This is something the EU actually used to be good at. Commentators would sometimes describe the EU as a, quote, regulatory superpower because of its ability to set global norms and rules. It also allows Chinese companies to mitigate the effects of protectionism, which is very much in vogue at the moment. Basically, lots of countries have decided they want to have their own domestic green tech industries. To this end, they've implemented protectionist policies like tariffs and local content requirements. The best known example is obviously the US, which has imposed tariffs in an attempt to encourage foreign companies to set up manufacturing inside the US. But lots of other countries have implemented similar policies. Brazil, for instance, provides preferential finance for green tech companies that use locally sourced components. Setting up production in these host countries allows Chinese companies to basically circumvent any protectionist measures and sell stuff to host country markets. In fact, setting up production in other countries can help Chinese companies access not only the host country market, but also other foreign markets that have barriers on trade with China specifically. This is particularly helpful in the context of the ongoing trade war between China and the US, which has imposed roughly a 47% tariff on Chinese imports. Chinese companies have been able to at least partly get around this by setting up shop in countries like Vietnam or the Philippines, which can export to the US at lower tariff rates, and will probably now try something similar in Thailand, Cambodia and Malaysia, which all negotiated tariff-free access to the US market at the ASEAN summit last month. Similarly, Chinese companies can circumvent any protectionist measures implemented by the EU by setting up projects in Germany, Hungary and Spain. Finally, in the longer term, these green tech investments could help with China's so-called overcapacity problem. In short, at the moment, Chinese companies are just producing too much stuff for the domestic Chinese market to absorb. This imbalance of supply and demand has pushed the Chinese economy into a state of deflation, because too much supply means falling prices. This might sound good. After all, who wouldn't want cheaper stuff? But economists generally consider deflation to be pretty terrible for an economy. This is both because, when consumers expect lower or flat prices, they have little incentive to spend, and because deflation effectively makes debt more difficult to pay off, which can slow the overall economy down as people and businesses pare back spending to make sure they can service any outstanding debts. This is an especially acute problem in China, which has a higher overall debt ratio than most countries. Anyway, moving production outside of China could both reduce domestic oversupply and even help develop the host country's economy. This would be great news for China because richer neighbours can provide a new source of demand for Chinese exports, which would allow China to continue running massive trade surpluses, even if other countries, like the US, try to reduce their dependence on Chinese goods. This is perhaps the main sense in which this investment boom can be compared to the BRI. One of the big advantages of the BRI is that it helped Chinese companies export to other countries, which allowed China to continue running massive trade surpluses and create constant demand for Chinese goods. While comparisons to the BRI can be overdone, unlike the BRI for instance, this overseas investment boom is being driven by China's private sector, and most of the funding is coming in the form of investment rather than loans. In this respect, there is a clear parallel. Both this overseas build-out and the BRI have helped Chinese companies access new markets, and might even help make these countries richer, which will in turn mean more demand for Chinese exports. Moreover, they both help solidify China's international dominance in certain industries, although the BRI was obviously more focused on traditional manufacturing, which might stir up some anxiety in Washington. If you're interested in major news events like this, you'll have certainly been paying attention to what's happening in the Middle East recently, with the whole region seemingly in a state of flux. The next issue of our magazine Too Long is all about that, with our headline section titled The New Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region and discuss their future, before reflecting on how recent events have reshaped the Middle East forever. We obviously talk about the Middle East a lot in videos, but this is our most zoomed out, detailed and thought through coverage yet, truly outlining how we see this region re-emerging. It's not just that though, there's also been a whole lot of major elections this year. So in this issue we have a whole section talking about all of the major elections that have taken place this year, and how global politics has changed. There's also articles on everything from China's continued dominance, politics in the UK, and how politicians have hijacked social media. This latest issue is now available to pre-order on our website, and as always, subscribing will get you 20% off not only this copy, but also every future copy as long as you're subscribed. Plus, just this time round, we're offering bundles with our book Assembly Required and our 2026 calendar. For instance, you can subscribe to Too Long and get a copy of the book for just £43.99, or add a calendar for only a few pounds more. Anyway, click the link in the description for all of the offers, and thank you for supporting the channel.